Hello, everybody. Great to not see you on a lovely spring day here in your nation's capital. While we let a few more folks join us, maybe we could start in the chat, make it a little interactive, and tell us your name and where you're from, and we'll let you all sort of introduce yourselves to us quickly while we let the laggards file in here. I should know if anyone felt we started a minute or two late, this is my fault. Allison and Dave were here in a very timely fashion. Maybe while we're waiting for folks to file in, Dave and Allison, you can introduce yourselves and tell us where you're from, what you do, and maybe how long you've been doing it.
Allison.
Sure. So I'm Allison Darling. I'm a senior national government sales manager for Grainger. Work on our government team. So we are focused on helping our government customers not only get the stuff they want, where they need it, when they want it from Grainger, but also making sure that they are able to access a compliant contract through Grainger. So I manage the Sourcewell Cooperative portfolio.
Very good. Dave, speaking of Sourcewell.
Yep. I'm Dave Duhn at Sourcewell. I'm in the supplier development team. What that means is we work almost exclusively with the suppliers that are awarded under our contracts. We have another separate team that focuses almost exclusively on the agencies, right? So they're talking to the purchasing agent in a city or county. Our role is to work with the suppliers and helping them understand how to best utilize our contract, frankly, to get the business they deserve. Because you all know there's business out there you deserve that you sometimes don't win. So that's what our role is.
Good. And by the end of this conversation today, the 60 or so folks out there will be experts on how to win more business. So, all right, let's get started. I realize that the chat may only be working for the three of us, which is maybe that was the plan. So feel free as we go through this. The Q&A is working. So look forward to engaging with all of you digitally that way. Thanks for joining us, and really excited to have you all here to hear from two really, really smart expert people who work for organizations that have really helped to define the cooperative purchasing space in the time that I've been associated with it. So we are extraordinarily lucky to have Allison and Dave. And we're going to spend about 40 minutes or so just going through a number of questions I think you all would like the answers to. Questions about really, from a supplier's perspective, what's all the fuss about cooperative purchasing? Why does it matter? Why is it an effective tool for you to sell into the state and local government market? And then we'll open it up in the last 15 minutes or so to a little bit of Q&A. So I'm David Yarkin. I'm the founder and CEO of Procurated, which for those of you who don't know is a ratings and review platform for the public sector. So think of it a little bit like Yelp for government. It's a place where people in government come to learn about great suppliers like Grainger, who are on great cooperatives like Sourcewell. And in a previous life, I was the chief procurement officer of Pennsylvania. So in the discussion today, I'm going to ask some questions, both as a supplier, but also as a government official to these guys, which I hope will be helpful to you. One last piece of housekeeping. We do want this to be interactive. So if you have a question that comes to mind, you don't have to save it to the end. Throw it in the Q&A, and as we move from one section of the discussion to another, we'll see if there's a question that's worth answering then, and if not, we'll get to it at the end. And if we don't get to it then, we'll get to it in a follow-up email. So let's get started. Allison, Dave, you've both been in the cooperative business for a fairly long time, despite your youthful image and mindset. So for those folks on the phone, maybe who don't have a lot of exposure to cooperatives, maybe tell us, why cooperative purchasing has become such a big deal over the last 10 years. What about it is so attractive to governments? What about it is so attractive to suppliers? And maybe Dave, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, David, let me just give a little history, because I think, the idea of governments having to bid made sense when it was a SKU and a price, right? It was, I'm going to buy this item, I'm going to take a SKU, I'm going to get a bunch of quotes, and I'm going to take the best price. I think what has happened in the last 10 years is that there's been a huge surge in looking for a solution, not a SKU. right? And so trying to write a bid for a solution becomes extremely difficult when there are services and warranty and response times and service level agreements. And so I think what has transpired is agencies need help in a number of areas that's hard to enumerate with, a bid skew. So I think the co-ops came along and said, by and large, I think all of us provide rather broad solutions, right? That sort of cradle to grave piece. It says, can you help me design it, build it, maintain it, take it to its life expectancy and make sure that it works. So that would be kind of my 2 cents of the evolution of what they're buying.
And maybe Allison, from your perspective, obviously Grainger for years has won a lot of business through a competitive RFP, but I think increasingly you're winning more business now through the cooperatives than you probably ever have before. So from your perspective, why is selling through a cooperative such an attractive thing for a supplier?
Yeah, that's a great question. We see so much struggle right now in our public sector customers in having the professional people to do the procurement work. It's a huge trend that we've really noticed throughout the pandemic. A lot of people leaving the public sector and a lot of people leaving procurement for private sector jobs. So at the end of the day, they have fewer resources to do the same or more procuring than they've had to in the past. And so the public agencies that we call on from coast to coast, they need solutions that they'll help them meet their bidding requirements and give them time back. And the cooperative contract is just such a logical fit for what we do, largely in part of that. It just gives them time back to focus on more strategic work.
Yeah. And I think it's been true for as long as I've been in bulk procurement. Time is something that is in the shortest supply for government. Do you think, maybe I'll turn this one back over to Dave. So cooperative purchasing, there's been a massive proliferation. I'm sure that, I don't know if you release how much dollar volume Sourcewell does, but I do know, I'm sure that it's been growing exponentially. But are there times where, cooperative is not the right decision for a government buyer? Like if you were in government, if you were advising someone in government, are there certain procurements that just don't make sense for a cooperative?
I think there are, and I think we should start with not everything they want to buy is on a cooperative contract, right? Right. I mean, there's a kind of an easy gap for me to, again, if we want to simplify things, if we're going to go into a category, the question is there a need? Is there an unmet need? And can we bring value? And if we can't, there's really no reason to have a contract. So there are going to be those things, I think, that a co-op can't do. There's also, and that's probably a whole nother webinar, is on, we all know that public procurement's political and people are saying, well, if I use a cooperative, they're going to think I'm being lazy and I'm not doing my job. And we always get a better price on a bid. I think, we could argue RFPs that they write are probably more political than the use of a cooperative, right? Yeah. But I think that's one of the elements that I've seen.
I think that's right. And I'll just sort of weigh in as a former procurement person. I think when cooperative purchasing really got started, 15, 20 years ago, I think it was buttonholed as, I'll use it for things that are more commoditized. And I do think, it's been interesting to sort of see over the last, say, 5-7 years, and in part because, as Allison said, the profession has really become depleted in terms of staff. It's being used now not just for goods, but also for, at first, sort of commoditized services, and now even more specialized services. But I think there are still, like if you're doing a $150 million custom IT project, for example, you could probably do it using, resources through a cooperative contract. But something that's very, very custom to your jurisdiction, that's very, very high profile, that may be one that makes sense to do your own solicitation. So now thinking about it from the supplier's perspective, okay, you've heard suppliers out there, you've heard Allison and Dave talk about why a cooperative contract is so attractive for a supplier. Let's say I'm not on a cooperative right now. How would you recommend, getting on one? How do you find a cooperative that may be putting out a bid? How do you sort of help educate them about what your solution looks like? Love to get your thoughts on that. Either one of you.
Dave, I'll take this one first.
Okay,
From my perspective, I think, in anything when you're looking for solutions in business, sometimes you start with the leaders and see what they do, and the ones that are well known in the marketplace. There's a reason why a cooperative is a national cooperative and why it's well adopted, throughout the country. Probably because they have resources, they do things well, they follow procurement law well and produce contracts that are beneficial to their members. There's good regional players too, but I think doing the due diligence on the cooperative that you use, maybe you start with the nationals, see what they're doing, compare it to the regionals, and you'll start to see some differences in what maybe fits with your organization, the style and the level of support and marketing that they can offer. And it becomes clearly apparent. And I think there's some very, very good players out there. But I don't think all cooperatives are created equal, most certainly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Anything, Dave, to add to that?
well, advice to the suppliers, I would say it is becoming a vigorous and very competitive process to be awarded by some of what I would call the top tier co-ops across the country. And it's extremely competitive, and understanding what that co-op is looking for. And even if you're a big name, I don't think you can take this for granted that you're just going to get an award because you're an industry leader. And we've actually had incumbents that didn't get re-awarded because they just figured, well, we had an award for 4 years, you're rebidding it, but you know who we are. And they didn't score well enough, and they were stunned. And so I think my advice to the suppliers is you don't just fill it in with a crayon and think you're going to get a bid. It takes a serious amount of work, and I think the process continues to get more and more competitive. So my advice is take it very seriously and see where it fits. Where does it fit into your world, and how is this going to help you get the business you deserve or have earned? Because you're right, to Allison's point, this is a much faster, better, more efficient way for an agency to buy from the supplier they want. And I think that would be my other starting point, David. If they don't want the supplier, no co-op contract's going to do them any good, right? They got to want that supplier first and foremost.
Yeah.
And then they tell me, the agencies tell me, we love that because we can pick the supplier. We know there's an array. We know that all these co-ops there's 9 different choices, right? But we get to pick the supplier that we know can perform, because I think you would admit to this as a former CPO, bidding's a pain, but problems are even worse, right? Having a problem supplier.
No, you're right, Dave. I mean, when I was in procurement, and my friends who are still in it would tell you, you do an RFP, you don't know what's going to happen at the end of that process, right? You don't know how the other suppliers are going to respond with pricing, how your evaluation committee is going to view the different suppliers, and you could end up with a supplier, who has a very poor track record. And if you do, you should have checked on procurated.com. Little plug there. But you don't know what's going to happen. Whereas you can do, by using a cooperative, you can go and find the supplier that you have a lot of confidence is going to meet your need. And again, there's ways, including our platform, Procurated, where the buyer can go in and actually read a lot of reviews from their peers across government and use that as part of their decision-making process to pick the supplier they want and find the cooperative that they're on. So I think there actually is more risk now in doing your own solicitation than in using a cooperative contract, because you're more in control of the outcome when you use a cooperative. Okay, so that's very helpful. And I will say one more thing on this, which is I think the process that I would use to get onto a cooperative contract or try to is different if I'm in a category that the cooperatives have contracts for already versus trying to help create a new one, right? So if I were to create Yarkin MRO Inc., and don't worry, Allison, I don't have any intention of doing that. But if I did, and I saw that Sourcewell had a contract for MRO that was expiring in 2 years, I would know it's unlikely they're going to cancel that contract and start over. So my job as a seller, as a business development person, is to sort of like any procurement opportunity, find the person who's doing the procurement, talking about my business, and then, try to be involved with them through a sales process, informing them about my business, why they should consider me when they go out to bid in 2 years, etc. Whereas if it's a brand new category, Chat GPT Inc. or something, a different name, of like some brand new AI technology that maybe Sourcewell doesn't have on a contract, then I got to educate Dave or someone else at Sourcewell about why they need to have a contract for generative AI, and then why I'm the best solution, right?
Yeah. So Dave, if I could add to that, at Sourcewell in the last couple of years, we've added an entire team that's all they do. So I manage a contract after it's awarded, and it used to sort of part-time, we would be looking to help find suppliers for an upcoming solicitation. We now have a dedicated team that wakes up in the morning, that's all they do. So starting 18 months to 2 years out, if it's an existing category, they're talking to the incumbents as well as the other major players in the industry about this upcoming response. And if it's a brand new category, you're spot on. We're doing lots of research into what should that scope look like, and we wouldn't want to unintentionally exclude an important element and someone say, that's the worst RFP we've ever seen, because you left out this element, which is critical to what that solution is. So we've recognized that and are growing it. And frankly, it's going very well because that's all they think about: the category, the scope. Should we be there? Who are the top players in the industry? Because it seems that's who everybody's looking for, right? Quality, not price. They want a competitive price, but they want a quality supplier.
Yeah. Great point. All right, so now we're going to get even more tactical, but I think really good. This is a good conversation for those of you who have a cooperative contract and are trying to think about how to best leverage it and how to be able to drive, just top line revenue to your company through the cooperative. Because now you're following this conversation, you've learned about cooperative purchasing, you figured out how to win the hearts and minds of people like Dave and get onto a cooperative contract. Now you have the contract. And how do you go about trying to grow it? So let me ask you, Allison, and your role at Grainger, when you're on a cooperative contract, how do you think about like you have this massive team of sellers out in the field, right? How do you make them aware of your cooperative contract and be able to have a conversation with thousands of people in procurement about your cooperative agreements so they can start to sell it and use that to your advantage?
So your questions around how do we share some of that knowledge and information with our sales force?
Yeah, how do you empower them? Yeah,
that is a question that I wake up every day and think about, because there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, right? We do have a big national sales force, and we also have people of different generations within our sales force that learn differently. So we are, number one, we've put together a pretty good national cooperative education curriculum that we impart to our team in a lot of different ways. We used to do really long webinars and really long live trainings. We started to learn that people learn things in shorter spurts, that they love videos, they like examples of where people in the country have won using a cooperative so that they can say, oh, I can do that myself. So we have a teaching cooperative that is very structured that we do on a quarterly basis throughout our teams. But our team also spends a lot of time in the field teaching and coaching our sales leaders, who then, teach and coach to their team members too. And then the other part of this, like, you got to walk the walk. So personally, I spend a lot of time in front of customers. And I mean, the learning is just incredible when you're talking to somebody in procurement and trying to understand how they view cooperatives, how they recognize your contract, what's important to them, and making sure that you're speaking that back to them, making sure you're acknowledging what their goals and priorities are and finding a way that solution can help them address it. So kind of to summarize, it's a combination of education through a lot of different channels, outreach to the people all over the country that make the calls, and then actually getting in the field and learning from the horse's mouth what customers want.
And I know, Dave, you work with a lot of sales teams. So what role does a cooperative play or in partnering with people like Allison to get the field sales team up to speed and making them a sort of extension of what you're doing.
Well, and I think we've said it, and Allison said it pretty well, but I think for suppliers, it's a huge mistake to lead with us. Hey, I have a Sourcewell contract. So what do you do? Right? I think it's just exactly backwards. And frankly, Allison, Grainger does a great job of that. You're there to talk about what you can do to solve their problem. We're just a way to buy. And I also believe sometimes suppliers will sell the co-op maybe a little too hard, right? Instead of going to RFP. That's not our decision. It's not the supplier's decision. That's procurement's decision on how they buy. And so I think presenting it as an option, I know there have been cases where Sourcewell said, I think the procurement person thought using the co-op was better for me, but maybe wasn't better for them. And I think that's an interesting perspective when Allison talked about understanding the customer. They need to decide this is the best way to go. We can help provide and support that. But if you push it too hard, I think that's a real mistake, right? And I would also say this to salespeople, and we say this all the time, introducing a cooperative contract early on can never hurt you. Because what's the worst thing that happens? They decide to go out to bid anyway. So you're really not out anything. But early on to be able to say, and we have this on a cooperative, and that's an available way. I mean, do you use that? Do you use a state contract? Do you use regional co-ops? Introducing that concept early can be really helpful for those salespeople. And again, I don't believe there's any downside to mentioning it.
Yeah.
David, I wanted to add, I don't know if you know this, but David is kind of a YouTube star. He's got a lot of videos out there on YouTube about cooperative purchasing. And not to pump you up, Dave, but one of the foundational things that I learned about cooperatives was at a Sourcewell University class where they teach you this basic concept, which I think everybody should know. It's what are the two questions a procurement official needs to answer every day? And it's what am I going to buy and how am I going to buy it? So what we've really focused on with our sales team is teaching them, please don't lead with the contract. You have to create desire for the solutions that we have. You have to listen to them and understand what it is they're trying to solve for, and then think how our solutions can meet that. And if you create that excitement in your offer and your solutions, then say, by the way, now that we figured out what you need to buy, I have a really easy way for you to buy it. And that's kind of when you introduce that contract. And it doesn't work like that every time, but I learned that from you, Dave. And I'm telling you that kind of general philosophy seems to be pretty accurate in our cooperative efforts.
Yeah. And I would add that, Allison, I think sometimes we make this harder than it needs to be. Wouldn't you agree, David? I mean, that's a pretty simple concept. Hey, I got a rule. I mean, I just had this conversation. They got to bid everything over $20,000. The sales rep goes in and says, you don't have to bid it. Yes, I do. We can't change the law, but what we can do is offer a vehicle that will satisfy that requirement. And we've said things. A lady years ago said to me, and I've used this line often, so you're kind of like a state contract in all 50 states. Well, that's a pretty basic, close analogy. I mean, that's kind of what we do. I mean, it's not exact, but it frames the conversation on how this works, right? And sometimes we're into, this just sounds too good to be true. What do you mean I can just pick you and you have the documentation? We're seeing less and less of that, but there are some of those people who aren't as familiar with using a co-op, and it scares them to death because they don't want to be on the front page of the paper or lose their pension or be accused of some kind of bid rigging or we get all that. And I think that's one thing all the cooperatives do a pretty good job is helping the suppliers understand we're here to help with compliance. Yes, it was competitively solicited. Yes, there was a competitive scoring process. Yes, to get them comfortable with how this worked. It wasn't a back street alley smoky room deal that was a handshake, right?
Yeah, it's a really good comment. And again, as I said before, I think there was a time where people felt like using a cooperative contract was riskier than doing your own bid. I think that the tables have turned on that for sure. And hopefully you all don't mind hearing the sirens. They're not coming to get me, speaking of risk. Mike Mascara, who also spent a lot of time in cooperative purchasing, had a question here. I'll frame it to you. And it's an interesting question. So if I'm a salesperson and I'm selling into a government and I want to sell through my cooperative contract, but I'm not selling to procurement at first, as you were saying, both of you, Dave and Allison, you're selling a solution. I maybe, maybe I'm selling, ammunition to, to a state police department. So I have a cooperative contract, I'm on it. My customer that I'm really trying to sell is not in procurement. My customer I'm trying to sell to is someone in state police. What role does the cooperative play, the cooperative contract? How do I, maybe this is for Alice or both of you, how do I frame this, the fact that I have the cooperative contract to the person in an operating agency? What benefit is it to me?
Well, I think first and foremost, the folks in the departments, they know how they get stuff bought. They know what the process is in their own department. And sometimes they don't have all the answers, but they know who to go to find out. So I think it kind of goes back to that other question is like, and by the way, Grainger does not sell ammunition. That's one of the few things we don't sell. So funny example. But I mean, the first thing I would do is, once you've kind of understood that you have a solution and the customer finds it a viable one, is to help them walk you through how they would typically make a purchase, and then see if they can guide you back to the people that make the decision or the influence on how things are procured. And more often than not, if they like your solution, they're motivated to help open those doors. So they may have a very decentralized procurement where that department has somebody who can make the decision, or they may have very centralized procurement where you have to go back to central procurement and it's sometimes as the supplier, you almost serve as a conduit between procurement and the department. And sometimes procurement and the department don't necessarily get along, and you could be sort of this peacemaker helping a solution that benefits both sides. So it actually, the relationship of owning a contract and having a valuable, solution can paint your company in a very good light in bringing people together on behalf of the organization.
So David, we are spending currently a lot of time on this very subject. So I'm really glad that question came up. I think the biggest mistake a supplier can make is your category manager, and I don't care if it's fleet or facilities or IT or whoever, they love your solution. The question is, yeah, but are they going to make the decision? And they go, no, I actually have to go to this lady in procurement, right? I think the worst they can do is send that category manager to procurement unarmed. Because again, let's keep this simple. When they go to procurement, and I'll use Allison as the example, hey, I want to use Grainger under the Sourcewell contract. Procurement can really only say three things: yes, no, or maybe. If they say yes, we teach our suppliers to get up and run out of the room and not buy it back, right? If they say no or maybe, it's always about us. It's never about Grainger. They have some question about who is Sourcewell, how does this work, is it compliant, I don't know if we can use it. So, but if you tell your category manager those are the only three answers and we can help you with the no or the maybe, then they have a fighting chance. And Allison, in some cases they know that, no, I have to go to her. And they may not want you there that first time, right? They might say, oh no, we don't want the supplier in here shilling us. So, but that's where deals get lost, because the buyer comes back and says, we loved you, but she shut us down. And they didn't have any defensible case to say, well, do you mind if I ask why you think we can't? Well, I'm not sure it's compliant. Well, we have resources we can help you with that. So.
Yeah, really good observation. I mean, when Dave was talking about the difficult lady in procurement, that was me. And so I'll sort of answer that, and I'm not going to defend myself or my colleagues, but it's true. So in this example, if someone from state police would come to me and say, we really want to use this specific supplier, and they're on a cooperative contract, and it's for ammunition, and we have a real time crunch, and it's federal funds, we got to spend it, et cetera. I think most people in procurement will sort of take a step back, right? There is a little bit, as Dave was sort of alluding to, a little bit of a healthy or unhealthy distrust sometimes between the procurement department and the using agencies. And I would say, well, I understand they want to use this specific supplier. Who else is out there? Does it make sense to do a procurement? Maybe state police wants to use supplier A, but there's a supplier B and a supplier C that are also on the same cooperative contract, right? And maybe it makes sense for me to do a little bit of diligence there, and again, to use a tool like Procurated to be able to sort of see which suppliers are the highest rated and which ones maybe have some challenges. But I think in general, the people in procurement are trying to be of service to the using agency.
Mhm.
And so if someone from the using agency says, look, we know all the players in this market, only supplier A really gives us confidence going forward, and they're on a cooperative contract, I think there's a good chance the person in procurement will say, look, I'm not looking to add more work to my plate. I'm already busy. I don't really want to do a procurement I don't have to do. And they'll go and they'll pull the trigger, pardon the pun with state police. They'll go ahead and pull the trigger and defer to the folks who actually have to make the trains run on time and go forward. But the reason why I tell that story and why I wanted Allison and Dave's opinion on this is a lot of times it is going to come back to procurement to actually sign off on the cooperative contract, to sign the participating addendum, which actually puts it in place. And so it is sometimes a little bit of a two-part sales process. Sell the operating folks, the folks using the contract, and then make sure the people who have to actually sign the agreement in procurement are cool with it, understand it. And at this point, most people in any procurement office of any size, they know all the cooperatives. They've gone to the trade shows. They know Dave, and they have confidence and comfort in using contract, certainly from the major cooperatives by now. All right, so let's say, and again, this question is for both of you. Let's say that there's a Sourcewell agreement for MRO, and let's say it's multiple award, and I think it is. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if I'm a government, I'm like, okay, I need to put a contract in place for MRO. I don't want to bid it out myself. I'm comfortable with the Sourcewell agreement, but there's 2, 3, 4 suppliers on it. From your perspective, Allison, how do you differentiate yourself from the other competitors who could also say, I'm on a Sourcewell contract?
Yeah. Well, there's a Sourcewell piece or a cooperative piece to this, and then there's the supplier piece. I think one foundational element is that it's so important if you decide that you want to compete for a cooperative contract that you kind of put your heart and soul into the response and really try to understand what the cooperative's looking for on behalf of their members. And if you put that time and energy in and you reflect back all the elements that they're asking for, chances are you're going to end up with a good evaluation score. And those evaluation scores tend to be very important to procurement, who's evaluating whether or not this is a contract we want to look on. I know at Grainger, we work really hard to get high evaluation scores. And so we tend to load lots of good, valuable benefits into our responses so that we get a good evaluation score, which reflects well when procurement looks at it. So that's kind of the cooperative and the contract piece of it. The other piece of it, though, is you as a sales professional, as a sales organization, as a supplier. I mean, do you walk the walk? Do you represent yourself and your solutions well? Are you listening to the customer and creating that desire for them, to do business with you? So that is that element of what you do every day, competing for business, showing up better than the other supplier, and so that never leaves. But I think that pre-work that you do in your RFP is really critical to have sort of that evidence of your high quality response and offer. If that makes sense.
So David, I would add from the co-op side, yeah, multiple awards are the flavor of the day. I mean, everyone is doing multiple awards. That the co-ops believe everyone that's scored above this line is an acceptable choice. There might be 3. We don't have a preset number. We're going to award 7. We're going to award 3. We're going to award 1. It is strictly based on that scoring, as Allison talked about. But we believe choice is an important piece. Now, I would tell you early on when multiple awards were less common, people were like, oh, you're going to promote my competitor? And I said, look, if we didn't award your competitor, they're going to get an award with another co-op. You're going to have to beat them anyway. So, I mean, this isn't an exclusive club. And if Sourcewell doesn't have the supplier, I'm pretty sure one of the other national co-ops does, right? So as special as we think we are, I mean, we don't have all the brands. Just last week, I recommended somebody go to another national co-op because they wanted a brand we don't have. I said, we don't have that brand, but they do. And I thought they're going to drop the phone. They're like, what? I said, well, if that's the brand, well, and this happened to be in a space where it's a local dealer with a and they said, this is the brand I want because this is the dealer I want. I said, I can't help you, but these guys can.
Yep.
Do you need their And they kind of looked at me like, really? And I said, we're a government agency. I mean, if we're not the best choice, or we don't have the brand you want, then, I mean, remember, these are convenience contracts. You're not forced to use our contract. If it works best, great. If it doesn't, but we're seeing a lot more of what the state of Ohio told me 10 years. We have to do a little bake-off, right? We have to do a little benchmarking. So we don't do all the heavy lifting, but in this case, there were multiple contracts. So they did a little benchmarking on pricing. They put together a little market basket and said, here's our product array. And so, I mean, in that case, they said you did 70% of the work, but I still had to do 20 or 30%, right? To your point, David, hey, show me that this is competitive, because there was a time when I think they thought co-op pricing was convenience store pricing and bid pricing was way better. And there probably was a time 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Now I think you'll see the national cooperatives with the volume they drive, the pricing's unbelievably competitive.
Yeah, and you're right, and it's competitive, I think, for two reasons, Dave. One is you represent a lot of volume, right? And we all know pricing is often a function of the volume that the buyer's bringing to market. So you represent a lot of volume, and plus it's competitive across the cooperative, right? I think all the cooperatives have a contract for MRO, for example. So Sourcewell has to be competitive with Omnia, National Value Point, E&I, and the other cooperatives, all of whom have contracts for, a fairly similar set of products. So these are good old-fashioned market forces, right, that are driving competitive pricing and also competitive terms.
David, the other thing I wanted to mention is that it is really important that we, as a supplier, show up in a competitive offer to the co-ops, because the alternative is that we would have to respond to thousands of solicitations all over the country. So this co-op contract really frees us up to do more strategic work as a supplier too, because we have a couple of really carefully competed for contracts that we then market to our customers, and it saves us a ton of time as opposed to having to respond to 50 states individual solicitations. That could be really painful.
And Allison, we're hearing that every day from agencies. I can't get anybody to respond to my bid.
Yeah.
And I said it was a 58-page bid for a $100,000 sale. Yeah. And suppliers are saying, my win rate's like 5%. I am not going to put all this time in when it's already available on the cooperative. The price on the cooperative is going to be as good or better than I would do on the bid. I'm just not doing it. Yeah. But again, you say, do you really want them to go through all that work? And you can see some of those agencies kind of say, hadn't really thought about it. I know you're trying to be diligent, but we know there are bid desks at suppliers that says pass, 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 or the pricing is going to be awful. Hey, if we get this deal, we're going to make some serious money because it's not going to be worth the brain damage. So just my 2 cents were from the other side of the street, which is kind of getting inside the agency's head.
No, 100%. You're both completely right on this. I have a question, another question from the group. So Andy Kim, and this is I think a common misconception. Andy Kim writes that he's on a bunch of cooperative contracts, but he hasn't gotten any bids, any wins, any outreach from being on the cooperative contract. And I think, something I've heard you say before, Dave, is like being on a Sourcewell contract doesn't get you a guarantee of any business. You got to go out and get it yourself, right? It's an enabler. It gives you, as Allison was saying, once you've sold the customer on your solution and on your brand, on your business, while you're the right fit for them, then you say to them, and I can give you a fast track to get to us through this cooperative contract. So I don't know if either one of you are surprised by Andy's comment that he hasn't won any business because he's on a cooperative. I expect that doesn't surprise either of you.
Yeah, David, what was a kind of a light bulb moment for me in talking to another former CPO like yourself. You have your supplier hat on, and if you take it off and get in your shoes, you realize you have a lot of choices and you have a lot of responsibilities, not only to manage the procurements, but to answer to your governor or your mayor or whatever and carry through their strategy. And so if you're not out there actively talking about looking for ways to help, looking at ways to take cost out of their business, bring efficiency to them, it's very difficult to get noticed. There's a ton more competitors that have got that CPO or that director of procurement's brain share or that director of facilities or what have you. So unfortunately, it doesn't take away the importance of the day job of getting out there and being in front of your customers and being top of mind.
Allison, that's a really good point. I think the cooperative landscape exploded when the economy was in shambles in 2009 and 2010, and commercials stopped buying. And people said, we don't really sell to government, but they're the only ones right now spending money, right? So that cycle of who's buying and when is really important. I also think, and I'll use our contracts as an example, we have not to exceed pricing. So if you won the contract at 30% off, you can have a further discount to try to win business, right? That's between you and the customer. And I think that's important because we believe in our solicitation, that way they get the price they deserve, not some set static price. So if a small town's buying one and yet another school is buying 2,500 Chromebooks, they're probably going to get better pricing on 2,500, right? Because the reseller will go back to the manufacturer, get a deviation on this deal, right, and provide that. So that's the other competitive piece is we've had in the past people say, well, I'm selling at the contract price and someone else is significantly lower because they offer a bigger discount. So it's always there and available. I don't know about you all, but with all my years of selling, every time I tried to give it away, I never made it up on volume and I had to give it away the whole time they were a customer. So that strategy never really worked for me. But you do have that ability to be competitive because, David, I think the other part from your agency side was they need a fair price. It just needs to be close. So if they think when they bid they can get it for $650 and your price is $670, that just might be close enough. But if you're at $870, they're going to say, I have no choice. I'm entrusted with public funds. I mean, I know I can do better on a bid. So I think you got to be in the game. And then you mentioned it earlier. This is really important. So did Allison, this time thing. As you know, the big national discussion is how much time is it costing you to do an RFP? And if it takes 4 months and how many hundreds of man hours, is the product even going to be available, especially with some of these shortages out there? So on the co-op, I could buy it today. They have it in inventory, but I'll use an example, a vehicle example. There's the vehicle I want. If I put out a bid, it's gone. I mean, it's not going to be there in 4 months after I do my evaluation. So I think those little things make a big difference. But to Allison's point, let's solve the problem first and then figure out, the best way for them to procure that makes sense for everybody, getting that fair price.
Yeah, great comments. And going back to Andy's question, just really I'll just give a very blunt answer. You can't wait in your office and wait for emails to come in from people saying, I saw that you're on the choice partners contract or the tips contract or whatever. You got to go out there, right? So you got to go out there. You got to have your sales team trained the way Allison talked about them, have them talk about your contract. It's not going to come to you. You've got to go out and get it like you would any other business. And then once you've sold the end user, then the cooperative contract is a way that you can get the deal done quicker. I'm going to ask one more question of Allison and Dave. And while I do, for those of you who are in the chat or in the audience, think about questions you may want to ask as follow-ups, and we'll have, I think, about 10 minutes to do that. So last question for both of you, just to help give the folks a little bit of sense of the landscape. Sourcewell, Dave, is a big national cooperative, right? Started off, I think, if I remember correctly, as a regional cooperative, but became a very big national cooperative. So maybe for people who may not know the difference, can you both sort of describe what it means to be what a national cooperative is versus a regional one, and if there's any advantages to being on a national cooperative versus a regional one?
Allison, you want to start?
Yeah, sure, Dave. I think you're truly the expert in this, but From a supplier's perspective, I think I mentioned this before, the national cooperatives, in my experience, what I've seen pretty frequently, and I haven't worked with the regionals quite as much, is that they have the resources to make sure that the solicitations they do follow the procurement rules of whoever they're serving, which is incredibly important. They also have the resources to support the contract. So when those members come knocking because they need a solution, and they can call the team at Sourcewell, for example, and say, oh my gosh, I need to solve for this. Do you have a contract? And you have people that answer the phone, that return the call same day, and will help those customers find their way to you. That's pretty huge. And I think that, a national cooperative has those resources, not only to be, to follow the law, to have a competitive solicitation, to organize a wonderful website that their membership can use to access important contract documentation, evaluation, affiliation forms, whatever you have it. It all goes back to being well-resourced and thoughtful around compliance for their membership. So Dave, I think you take it from here.
Well, I think, David, on the regionals, without talking too much about Sourcewell, our original charter in the 70s was to serve 5 counties and just school districts. So that's what we did. We lived in our little, and there were 9 of them in Minnesota, right, where we're domiciled. They then changed the law to said you can serve anybody in government, education, or nonprofit, and you can do it anywhere. I would tell you the other 8 co-ops in Minnesota still are serving a 5 or 6 county area. They're still thinking like your typical government agency. We took a different direction and said, if we can do this well, how about if we had a bigger landscape, a bigger audience, could get better pricing? The rest is history. But we work with a regional co-op down in Texas. They do their own local bids, like paving, things that are terribly local, right? We're not going to have a national contract for paving. I mean, it's just not going to be. So I think the regionals still have value. Co-op purchasing's been around forever. We still see people pooling volume and saying, hey, if the 4 of us get together, can we, let's buy a boxcar full of Fort Howard paper towels because we'll get a better price than if we. So I think the concept has always been solid. There's been a springing up of new co-ops because I think people are saying, hey, wait a minute. If all I need to do is get an agency to do my bid and I go out to market it, right? I could maybe provide some real value. I think the C word still comes in, compliance. Who's doing it? How are they doing it? I mean, to toot our horn a little bit, we're a national award-winning government agency. For the last 7 years, we've won the award for excellence in procurement. You got to be a government agency to earn that, but that's a pretty proud moment for us. Say, this is how good our document is. So we can stand behind it. It will withstand an audit. We checked all the boxes, but I think some of the regionals do a really nice job. We have an association that bid a category. It was in airports. One bid it, but they put in piggyback language and said, hey, every other airport in the country can use our bid. Mm-hmm. And it was for jet bridges. How many jet bridges that get sold in a year? Not a lot, but somebody might need 1 or 2 or an upgrade. And I thought, what a collegial way to do that. I mean, what kudos to them, because that's at the essence of what a co-op is. It's just working together.
That's how it started, right?
Yeah.
So just to maybe pull on this thread one more time, and then we'll go into some Q&A. So let's say I'm a small business, right? I'm not Grainger, right? Let's say I sell, janitorial supplies, and I only really sell in half of Tennessee. And any part of Tennessee is a place I want to be. I love their hot chicken, but let's say I only sell in half of Tennessee, and I don't have the ability or maybe even the interest to do it, right? Should I be pitching you, Dave, about being on a national contract, or should I look for like a Tennessee regional cooperative and just talk to them about being on their cooperative? Wait, what's the right answer for that small business that is happy in their space?
So we would never discourage anyone from responding to our solicitation. But one of the things this category development team of ours does is to say, we probably think you're going to need this many points. What is your ability to sell and service nationally? And if the answer, and you look at the number of points and say, is that going to knock you out of contention? Now that's up to you. There's also other alternatives to become a hub partner or a minority partner. You know, all the big national players have those partners because, as you know, those guidelines have in some cases turned into mandates. I got to have a local disadvantaged veteran, India, or whatever it happens to be. So we're just seeing more of that popping up where they're saying, I got to hit 18%. And you know, some big national player isn't going to fit the criteria. Who do they have as a hub partner?
Yeah, great comment. All right, we have a question in the group. Before I get to it, I did have a question. Someone asked about how to find Procurated. So I'm going to show you that really quickly, then come back to your question. So this is procurated.com. Anyone can access it. Hopefully you can see my screen. If you're a supplier and you're trying to learn more about Procurated, just click on the For Suppliers button and just claim your page. It's absolutely free, and then you get plugged into the work that we're doing here. And it's easy for governments to find you if they're looking for a supplier for their requirements. So that is Procurated. Okay, here is a question from the group. Someone wants to know, if I'm on a contract that's dominated by one or two suppliers because they're a lot bigger than the others, what do I do to try to break through? Love to get both your takes on that.
Well, I guess I can give my perspective that if I had a sales representative from Grainger asking me that, Grainger's maybe not such a good example because we're a bigger player, right? But we compete all the time and we get shut out of markets and situations just like the next supplier. I mean, it all goes back to like your basic selling skills, which is, are you reaching out to the customer? Is your messaging right? Are you listening, and are you getting in front of them? So it's really more of a sales thing than anything else. You have to resonate with individuals and their initiatives and their goals. And it doesn't matter if you're a little company or a big company. If you can resonate with them, then you're in. But that takes some elbow grease and some customer face time and some effort and tenacity, most certainly.
Yeah. So Dave, I think from our perspective, I mean, size is important for scale, but I mean, we've had people respond to the bid that says, I promise if we get awarded, we'll hire 13 people. Well, that's a little disconcerting to us, right? But there are also smaller firms that are very nimble and very good and have the ability to do it and have a network or a system. So I think it's the compelling part of, remember, when we do an RFP, we're not telling you what to bid. We're asking you to tell us a story. Say, what do you do? And why do you get picked? And what's your value proposition? And why do people around the country want to do business with you? Because that's what Sourcewell is looking for. We're looking for A players, and they don't have to big. I mean, we've got some new services in consulting that they aren't that big, right? But everybody started small. I manage a contract that, when I started managing it, I just looked it up, 2009, was doing under $50 million a year. They're now doing almost $1 billion. So to give you, so they grew in the market and said, this is our go-to-market strategy. And so, there's just a lot of categories where the small players make up a huge part of the market. There isn't a single dominant player.
Yeah, and you got to start somewhere. And going back to what you keep saying, the beauty of being on a cooperative contract is you may not have a team of 20 lawyers who are going to be able to review all these different opportunities. But when you're on a cooperative contract, you don't need that, right? You sign the deal, you agree to the terms once with a cooperative, and then when you can go sell the other, sell to the governments, they can just use your contract. It's actually a great tool, cooperative purchasing, for suppliers who may not have a lot of resources, because cooperatives cut out a lot of that sort of administrative work, that back and forth. We are almost out of time. I want to make sure people can reach Allison and Dave, because you're massively smart, and I want people to make sure they can reach you. I'm going to try something here I've never done before, the whiteboard. So let's see if I can make this work. Let's see here, guys. Okay. Do you all see a whiteboard here? Do you see one? Yeah.
Almost. It's coming up.
Does anyone see it? Yeah. Can you try to write your names and phone numbers and email addresses on there, Allison and Dave? Does that work?
Okay.
I can draw here. This is something. Here's text. You can press on the T.
Like this? This is going to be really bad going back to kindergarten printing here, David.
Press the T. There's a T on the left.
Ah, there we go. Does my
I appreciate the
technological
effort.
savvy.
Is this your first time with the whiteboard? It's mine.
Apparently so.
If you're at home, you can hopefully not laugh at us too much here. But I'm putting in my information. I see Dave trying. There's Dave going there. I'll also put the website here for Procurated so you can find it. See, we can make this. All right, great. I think Dave's in. Allison's in. Here's the URL for Procurated. So thank you all very much for joining us, and a special thank you to Allison and Dave for some real pearls of wisdom. If you were paying for consulting advice, you would have all paid $1,000 or more for this. So and not for me, $500 each to Allison and Dave. So thank you both very much for your time and your willingness to share all the secrets that you learned with this great audience. We really, really appreciate it. And for those of you who joined us in the crowd, thank you very much for joining us. Feel free to send any of us a question. And I hope you do go to Procurated and claim your profile, and we'll follow up with you and tell you how you can really get the most out of our platform. So with that, it's 12 o'clock on the nose. Thank you all. Have a very good and productive day.
Thank you.
Thank you.